I'd like to start this video off by saying that if you agree with the points I'm about to make, to please share the video and share the message. Talk about it with your friends and family and share it with somebody who you think might like it, or perhaps more importantly, somebody who you think won't like it. I want this message to reach as many people as possible. If you disagree with the points that I'm about to make, please feel free to comment underneath and help start a discussion. But please remember to keep it civil. Everybody has a right to their own opinion, especially at a time like this where nobody really knows the correct way forward. I'm always curious to hear people's opinions, as it is the only way I can properly evaluate my own ideas and put them to the test. I've been so focused on being outraged by BLM recently for breaching lockdown with impunity that I forgot the real target, and the thing that I'm angry about is lockdown itself. I can remember wanting Boris Johnson to lock us down before it happened, because just like everyone else, I was terrified of the virus and felt like I should not be compelled to work and put my health at risk. But after about a week or two into lockdown, I realised what a colossal mistake it was. I may be a little late to the party, but in this video I'm going to share with you the reasons why I think lockdown was a mistake and why I think we should end lockdown as soon as possible. I've always been quite liberal, meaning I'm very concerned with freedom and the liberty to do what you want so long as you don't harm anyone else. The coronavirus has for the first time made it so that the freedom to be out in public means you are potentially harming someone else, and so has created a moral dilemma for me. So in my eyes, it's a question of balancing out the freedom to be out in public with the responsibility to keep safe, and in doing so, keeping others safe. If I were in charge and knowing what I know now, I would have taken a different approach. I would have not prevented people from doing what they want, whether that means going to the beach, going to the pub, or going to a mass gathering, whether it be a concert, football match, wedding venue, or a protest. But I also would have ensured that people have the financial freedom to stay at home if they chose, as I believe people should not be forced to work and put their health or their family's health at risk. This is why I'm in favour of furlough. This way, if you believe yourself to be at great risk of the virus, you have the freedom to stay at home and shield. But if you believe that you are not at particular risk, you have the freedom to meet with your friends, open your business, and live your life. I would have also urged people to stay at home where possible, but conceded that they have every right not to. This, I believe, is the right balance between rights and responsibility, and would ensure that no one was oppressed by lockdown, because being locked in your home against your will is the literal definition of oppression. The lockdown was sold to us by Boris Johnson for three key reasons. One, to buy us time to learn about the disease and push the disease into the summer. Two, to protect the NHS by ensuring that it doesn't get overwhelmed at any point, which would see people unable to get treated, like in Italy. Three, to wait for potential treatments, track and trace apps, vaccines, and other methods of beating the virus. So let's analyse each one of these. We are now 3 months into the lockdown and around 7 months since the beginning of COVID-19. The only thing, as far as I can tell, that we've learned is that nobody has any idea how to beat it. We were told if we stayed at home and avoided people from outside our household, we would be protecting ourselves. But if that's the case, how come 66% of New York COVID cases got COVID by following the rules? This is a surprise. Overwhelmingly, the people were at home, said Andrew Cuomo, who's the governor of the state of New York, according to CNBC. We thought maybe they were taking public transportation and we've taken special precautions on public transportation, but actually no, because these people were literally at home. Further down in the article, the Miami Herald says, the reality is that New Yorkers, along with the rest of the country, aren't truly staying inside all day, safe from exposure to COVID-19, the disease the coronavirus causes. Really? I think that staying at home is more important than that. Nathan Grubar, a random expert in the Department of Experts Telling You How to Live Your Life told McClatchy News in an email. He mentioned that grocery shopping, walks in the neighbourhood, ordering food and grabbing your mail can all expose you to someone who may be infected. There are lots of ways to get exposed, Grobar said. I highly doubt that many people were truly locked in with no outside contact. So they weren't socially distancing hard enough. Nice effort, guys, but you still went for that walk in the park and got that pizza delivered. It must have came in that way. Which, if nothing else, surely goes to prove that lockdown and social distancing is ineffective, at least in New York, and they might as well throw open their economy again. So we don't really know if social distancing is the way forward. It just seems like common sense that if you stay away from people, you will not get the virus, but there's no hard and conclusive science involved. Not to mention, the 2-metre rule is based on little evidence, other experts say, amid mounting calls on government to drop the measure. Of 38 studies, only one looked specifically at coronavirus infections in relation to a specific distancing measure of 2 metres, and it found it had no effect. The pair of experts claimed the evidence in favour of the 2-metre rule is of poor quality and impacting Britain's chance to go about normal daily life. A senior statistician expert at the University of Dundee also found the data for the 2-metre guidelines, which informed experts at the WHO, is flawed. So there's no scientific consensus over social distancing, which has informed the lockdown policy. It seems like it can get you in any number of unknown ways, and so shutting down the economy is misguided. And we are now in the summer months, so we've ticked that box. But what about the second wave? Well, what if there is no second wave? The only way we're going to find out is the hard way. I personally believe that what we've just been through is the second wave, with the first much smaller wave happening in December. I know lots of people around Eastbourne believe they had it in December, including loads of my friends and family. But what about reinfection? Again, the only way you will find out is the hard way. I think that if you've had COVID, that you must have some level of immunity. And again, there seems to be no scientific consensus. But I think that if it were possible to get reinfected, and given that we're about 6 months into this global pandemic at this point, we'd have plenty of case studies around the globe to prove that we could get reinfected. I also think that this could go some way to explaining why Hastings has the lowest COVID infection rate in England. I know people from Hastings who were sick in December, and if Hastings had a wave back then and got immunity, it would explain why it's pretty much untouched now compared to the rest of England. In the data released by Public Health England on Wednesday, May 13th, the town reported an infection rate of 48.5 per 100,000 people. But further down in the article it states, elsewhere in East Sussex, Eastbourne accounts for 147 of confirmed cases, a rate of 142.5 per 100,000 people. So maybe I'm wrong, but it's only a theory I have. Who knows? But that's exactly my point. Who knows? If there really is a second wave lurking around the corner, and you believe in immunity, surely it would be better to get it out of the way during the summer months, right? We might find that by continuing social distancing and lockdown during summer, that we push that second wave back into the winter. And if there's more risk of overwhelming the NHS during the winter, and we've pushed the second wave back into the winter, we will probably have to lock down again, and maybe even tighter this time. So moving on to lockdown reason 2, to prevent overwhelming the NHS. Where to even begin with this one? Well, first of all, do you remember Professor Lockdown, Neil Ferguson? The expert who thinks it's dead important that we stay 2 metres apart, but not so important that he stopped his affair. The expert who created the infamous Imperial College model that warned Boris Johnson that without an immediate lockdown, the coronavirus would cause 500,000 deaths and swamp the National Health Service. Yeah, well, Johann Jasecki, another expert you've never heard of, has called Ferguson's model the most influential scientific paper in memory. He also said it was, sadly, one of the most wrong. Don't believe him? Well, let's see what another expert has to say. Let's turn to expert Neil Ferguson, whose grim warnings prompted Boris Johnson to order total lockdown, admits Sweden may have suppressed COVID-19 to the same level, but without draconian measures. The professor admitted there is lessons to be learned from Sweden moving forward. Sweden dodged a major crisis without locking down and seeing the economy implode. So, the figures predicting the overwhelming of the NHS were bad. Not to mention the NHS requisitioned private hospital beds to the tune of £2.4 million a day, only for the hospitals to be sinfully empty, leaving hundreds of the country's top doctors bored and twiddling their thumbs, all based on dodgy intel. Sounds a bit like Iraq all over again, doesn't it? So the NHS, it seems, hasn't even got close to breaking point. I've heard anecdotally, by talking to people who work at the NHS, that apparently the COVID wards are like hell on earth, but the rest of the areas in the hospitals are coping just fine. Reason number 3 for locking down: to wait for potential treatments, track and trace apps, vaccines and other methods of beating the virus. Well, we've now got dexamethasone, which apparently proves to be the first life-saving drug. As for the track and trace app, well, let's just say it's not going so well. And I'm not prepared to put my life on hold for any longer waiting for the incompetent UK government to rescue us from ourselves. As for the vaccine, if we ever manage to make one up, I won't be taking it for my own personal reasons. And again, I'm not prepared to put my life on hold any longer. Which brings me to my main concern in all of this: freedom. First of all, I should have the freedom to risk getting the virus if I want. I believe I should even have the freedom to deliberately get the virus if I want. My body, my choice, right? So I should especially have the freedom to reject this rushed and potentially, in my opinion, more dangerous vaccine, if I want. And for the record, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've been vaccinated against plenty of stuff voluntarily. But you are the master of your own destiny, and the master of your life. You are the one who is most responsible for keeping yourself safe, and you are the one who is responsible for deciding your own level of risk. We have set an extremely dangerous precedent in letting the government just seize our freedoms and oppress us all for our own safety. And once they have taken away one freedom, especially such an important one, which is freedom of assembly, the next one is even easier to take. That's how you end up living oppressed under an authoritarian regime. And as Benjamin Franklin once said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. You should have the freedom to go to your favourite restaurant, or to go to the pub, or a concert, or a protest. Particularly protests. The freedom to protest is especially important at all times. You should be free to have a kickabout with a big group of your mates down the field, particularly at a time when public health, and so your own personal health, is so important. You should be free to go to the beach and work on your tan, particularly as it seems that vitamin D and exposure to sunlight helps you in fighting COVID-19. You should be free to live your life how you see fit, whether you see fit to shield or whether you see fit to take a risk. And think about key workers for a second. So it's okay for staff at Asda to take a risk in their duty to feed the nation, but it's not okay for them to take a much lower risk to chill out on the beach for a couple of hours. That hardly seems fair to me. And we should not be judging each other in the decisions we make on how to live our lives. Whether that means we are taking what we would consider an unnecessary risk, or whether we are shielding out of paranoia of catching the virus, even if we are otherwise healthy. As long as you shield properly and are not exploiting the system to get free money without having to work, even if you are the healthiest person alive, I believe you should have the freedom to shield with the assistance of furlough. But you should also have the freedom to open your business if you see fit, and let the free market decide whether they want to take the risk of going into a crowded pub or not. I've used the words free and freedom too much, so I'm going to briefly move on to the economy. If a business wants to open and earn money and contribute to the tax pot instead of being forced to stay closed and take from the tax pot, they should be able to do so. This means furlough can continue longer for the people and businesses who legitimately need it, because we're going to have to pick up the bill for furlough sooner or later, and once that bill comes in, I think it's going to be a rude awakening for all of us. Not only that, but the longer we stay locked down, the more businesses will collapse, the more the high street will die, there'll be more competition for jobs, more people will be on benefits and taking tax money instead of providing tax money. And with the economy in tatters, we will have more austerity because there will be less taxpayer money to pay for things like the NHS, police, schools and other public services. Less money for green policies, which will mean more air pollution, less money for benefits for people who really need our help, less money for free school meals throughout the summer, and less money for everything. This will also probably lead to less health and safety in the workplace, as the priority will become about getting the job done quickly rather than safety first. I fear health and safety in the workplace might be thrown out the window in favour of helping the economy recover faster. It may also lead to things like lower quality finished products, for example, new housing estates being built in a rush. Another point against lockdown, which I personally think is the most powerful one, and if you disagree with this point, then please do leave me a comment. I'd love to know what you have to say. You can't prove to me that anything that we've done in terms of locking down or socially distancing has saved even one single life. Now, think about this for a minute. I believe it probably has saved some people, but there's no conclusive evidence that it has. The coronavirus and lockdown are just way too complicated for us to draw any solid conclusions. There exists a chance that if we didn't lock down, that less people would have died, both in the short term and in the long term. The only way you'll ever know is if you have a crystal ball. However, although you can't prove to me that it saved any lives, I can prove to you that lockdown has taken lives. Take Red Gale, for example. Father of one, 21, took his own life after telling family and friends he would not be able to get through coronavirus lockdown without being able to see them. Or how about Abigail Hussey, who was unable to travel 200 miles from some place that I can't pronounce in South Wales to her grandmother's funeral, even though Dominic Cummings was allowed to travel 260 miles. She was scared of breaking COVID rules on non-essential travel that were brought in during the COVID-19 pandemic. Her devastated father says he believes that the most likely cause of his daughter's death is suicide. Still not enough for you? How about Hayden Huxtable, a 12-year-old who committed suicide during lockdown and whose father believes he did it because of the general depressive state that social isolation causes? Another one more recently, Steve Bing, although it's not confirmed as being because of lockdown. TMZ reported that Steve had been depressed about being isolated and the lack of human contact during the coronavirus lockdown, but it's currently unclear if this had anything to do with his apparent suicide. There's also a rise in alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, and not to mention, imagine if you had a condition that was terminal and you got given 6 months left to live on the day before we went into lockdown. You'd have already wasted half of the time you have left at this point. Imagine you're an elderly person who would rather take your chances than spend the rest of your life locked down for your own safety.
Whether or not
James,
yeah, of course, yes.
I've got a cruise going from Copenhagen.
I don't think you have.
Well, we had to cancel the one we had in March. I've got one in July. But me dancing and singing in the swimming pool, I enjoy it. It makes me happy.
I know, but if it makes you ill, if it makes you ill, would it be worth it, do you think?
Oh, well, but, you know, it's risk and reward, isn't it? My husband's created a life for me that is happy and fun.
Of course.
And I survive it. And I adore him for it. But it's risk reward for me. And my friends are quite happy to do it as well. And we're all looking forward to it.
And then all
And-
the other people you mix with who are being really careful, they run the risk of course, being infected by you and your friends, don't they?
Well, then they shouldn't go out if they don't want to. You see, you can't wear a mask in a swimming pool. Well, you could wear one of the aquas that, as
Yeah.
scuba, whatever. But, I mean, bottom line, if people are really scared, that is their choice. I've got to the point where, I just want to sing and dance, James.
Imagine you're a normal person and you walk out into the road and get killed by a car. Would you be happy that you spent the last 3 months of your life hiding in your house? Life is too short to waste staying at home for a virus which may or may not even have any effect on you. Again, I completely sympathise with those who are vulnerable, and I also sympathise with those who are just fearful of COVID-19, even if they're just paranoid. But if you are neither of those things, you should not be prevented from living your life, particularly in the summer months. So in summary, you should join me in being against the lockdown if you don't trust the government and the experts informing them, don't believe in the second wave, believe you are immune and don't believe in reinfection, don't want to wait for a vaccine or take a vaccine, if you don't believe the virus is as dangerous as it's made out to be, if you don't believe the virus exists at all, if you want to go to the pub or a restaurant or get a haircut, if you want to go to a protest, if you want to do your bit for the economy instead of taking from it, if you want furlough to continue for the needy as long as possible, if you're concerned about the high street, if you're anti-austerity, if you want more funding for public services, if you're in favour of green policies and free school meals, if you're in favour of job security and health and safety in the workplace, if you're concerned about mental health and suicide, and if you're concerned about alcoholism, drug abuse and domestic violence. But most importantly, if you believe that the individual is the master of their own destiny and not the government. I think the two best arguments against the lockdown are represented by these two pictures here from the anti-lockdown protests in America. The bottom line is this: you have no right to tell me I can't go to my favourite restaurant, just as I have no right to tell you that you must go back to work. I am the master of my own destiny, just as you are the master of yours. If you want to shield, then by all means shield. But you should not stand in the way of someone who wants to find out for themselves. And the only way to ever find out how dangerous the virus is for you as an individual is by opening your front door and walking out of it. You may never get infected. You may get infected and be entirely symptomless. You may get it and be one of the unlucky healthy people who ends up dying from it because they reacted badly to it. You may think you're at high risk and then get it and find that it doesn't affect you as badly as you predicted. Nobody knows, but you should not prevent people from living their lives how they see fit. One quick final point. I've always believed that one of the reasons that the Diamond Princess cruise ship was quarantined was to see how the coronavirus would spread inside of it. I believe they quarantined it for science purposes as much as anything else. The Diamond Princess was essentially like a giant experiment with the passengers being the test subjects. It's a horrible thing to do to people, but I imagine the experts would have learnt a lot about how the virus spreads thanks to the Diamond Princess and its passengers. The same principle should also apply to people who want to ignore lockdown and social distancing. Those people should be allowed to do what they want, even if the only reason is so that we can all see what happens to them. They can be the first ones to brave going into a crowded cinema or a stadium. Otherwise, we are doomed to live in fear forever that a second wave is lurking around the corner. You may find that the people you've been slagging off for packing out Bournemouth Beach are the ones who disprove a second wave and speed up the process of returning life back to normal. If you made it this far, I just want to say thank you very much for listening to what I have to say. If you agree with me that we should end the lockdown, please share this video. I believe it's time to remind the government that we tell them what to do, not the other way around.